The air grows still, the shadows lengthen, and somewhere, a truth yearns to be uncovered. Welcome to RR Stories, the sanctuary of secrets, where every creak is a whisper and every silence holds a hidden narrative. Take a seat, warm yourself by the embers of forgotten lore. Now, let us unravel another story.
Aswang in Alaska.
The northern hunger. The cold wasn't just a temperature. It was a physical presence, a weight that settled into your bones and squeezed the heat right out of your marrow. It was nothing like the cold we got back home in Manila, where a temperature drop meant the air conditioning in the mall was finally working properly. This Alaskan cold was ancient, biting, and frankly, rude. I stood on the porch of my kuya's cabin, pulling the fleece-lined hood of the parka so tight around my face that I could only see a narrow slice of the world. It was late afternoon, but the light was already fading, giving the snow-covered landscape a bruised purple hue. The air, crisp and so clean it hurt to inhale, smelled of pine and something else. Something metallic, like ozone or maybe distant wood smoke.
What are you doing out here, Bunso? You're gonna freeze your pwet off.
My brother Benito slid open the glass door. He was bundled in a thick wool sweater, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand. Benito, or Ben, as he preferred to be called here in Anchorage, had the build of a man who worked with his hands. He'd left the Philippines 15 years ago. Now, at 35, he carried an air of quiet self-sufficiency that felt miles away from the boisterous, perpetually stressed brother I remembered. He was American now, in all the ways that counted. "Just taking a look," I mumbled, pulling the hood down enough to talk properly. "It's vast. Vast was an understatement." We were 20 minutes outside the main city, nestled on the edge of a wooded area that seemed to stretch into infinity. The silence was total, broken only by the faint thump-thump of my own heart. "It is," Ben agreed, leaning against the doorframe. "It takes some getting used to."
Now, come in. I've got dinner started. Adobo. Proper chicken adobo, the way Nene used to make it. Plenty of vinegar, not too much soy.
The promise of authentic Filipino comfort food was all the convincing I needed. I shed my outer layer by the front door and followed him into the warmth. The cabin's interior was cozy, all exposed wood beams and a crackling fire in a stone hearth. The smell of vinegar and garlic was intoxicating. I was 3 days into my 2-week vacation. I'd come to see Ben, certainly, but also to escape the crushing pressure of working in a Manila public hospital. Yet, 3 days in, a strange anxiety had begun to creep in. "So," I said, stirring the pot of rice Ben had set on the counter, "you mentioned the town's been a little tense?" Ben's hands paused as he was chopping an onion. The rhythmic thwack 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 stopped. He didn't look at me. "Just a bit of local trouble. Nothing for you to worry about, Paulo." "Local trouble involving 2 missing kids and a couple of women dying in childbirth? That's what the news on your laptop was saying this morning." Ben sighed, putting the knife down. He finally looked at me, his eyes tired.
The kids, it's awful. The police think maybe a drifter, or an animal, though that's a stretch. The deaths, though, those are unrelated. It was a bad flu season.
His explanation was too rational, too neat. It felt rehearsed. "What about the last one?" I pressed, lowering my voice.
The pregnant woman, Leah Peterson? The news said the autopsy report was unusual. Said she died from massive internal hemorrhage, but they couldn't find the source of the bleeding.
Ben gave the adobo a vigorous stir, the steam billowing around his face.
"Look, I didn't want to talk about this because you're here on vacation, but there was some chatter in town, a lot of whispers, especially after Leah Peterson. She was due next week. Young, healthy girl." He turned off the heat.
Under the adobo, the sudden silence was heavy.
"The weird part, Paulo, the part that's making people talk, is what was missing."
"Missing?"
"The baby,"
he said, his voice flat.
"When they found her, the medical examiner said there was no sign of the fetus. Not in the womb, not anywhere. No sign of forced entry, no struggle. Just the perfect surgical incision. The doctor couldn't explain it."
A cold knot formed in my stomach, a cold that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. A surgical incision, a baby, vanished from the womb. I thought of the folklore, the stories my Lola used to whisper to me during typhoons. The creature that was once human, who split its body in half, leaving the lower torso behind, and flew with its guts dangling, hunting in the darkest nights. The creature that hunts the unborn.
Paulo,
Ben continued, stepping closer.
don't even think it. Don't bring your pamahin, your superstitions, into this. This is America. This is a crime, a psycho, maybe a cult, but it's not some half-woman, half-bird monster from the Philippines. The Aswang stays where the mangoes grow.
He tried to laugh, but the sound was thin and brittle. I know the stories, Ben, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I know the sound it makes when it's far away, a loud... And I know the sound it makes when it's right outside your window, a quiet little peep, like a chick.
Stop it.
He ordered, gripping my shoulder.
This is Alaska. They have bears and wolves here, real things that kill. The Aswang doesn't look like a monster, Ben. It looks like a person. A neighbor. It hunts in the shadows, yes, but it knows how to live among us.
And what does it hunt? Pregnant women. The blood of the fetus. The liver and heart of the young. The silence returned, more profound this time. Ben's hand dropped from my shoulder. We had a case last month in Manila, I finally said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. A street child, maybe 6 years old. Found in an alleyway, perfectly drained. No bite marks, just a puncture wound right beneath the rib cage, maybe the size of a surgical trocar. I walked over to the window and stared out at the gathering twilight. I peered into the black gap between the trees. Tell me, Ben, I said, turning back to him, do they have a lot of bats here in the winter? Flying around at night?
Bats?
He scoffed. It's 30 below zero, Paulo. Nothing flies here but the wind.
The sound.
Just then, a sound cut through the silence. It wasn't a cry or a scream. It was a high, thin, almost musical whistle from the woods, a single, drawn-out note that seemed to hang in the frigid air. Too delicate to be real. Ben's eyes went wide. He looked at me, and in his face, I saw the comfortable, rational American disappear, replaced by the terrified Filipino boy who'd grown up hearing the same stories I had.
What was that?
He whispered, his voice shaking. I walked to the front door, slipping on my boots and grabbing my coat without a word.
Where are you going?
He demanded.
Paulo, stop.
I pulled the door open, letting a blast of frozen air into the warm cabin. I stood on the porch, listening. The whistle didn't repeat. Then, from further down the woods, another sound, fainter this time, like a little, sweet bird call. It was too far away to tell if it was a threat, a question, or a simple echo. But I knew the sound. Every Filipino child knows the sound. It is far away. It is safe. I zipped my parka up to my chin and stepped off the porch and into the crunching snow, walking in the direction of the sound. I had come to Alaska to escape my life as a doctor, but the pathology had followed me.
Paulo, get back here.
Ben yelled, his voice strained with panic. It's just a sound, Ben, I lied, turning to face him. A little bird, probably one of those owls. I'll be right back. I gave him a quick, reassuring smile that felt utterly fake and walked toward the dark.
Inviting woods.
Pulling my hood up to shield my face from the cold. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew, deep in my gut, that the horrors of the Philippines and the darkness of Alaska had just converged into a single, terrifying truth. I had found the Aswang's new hunting ground, and it was hungry, a different evolution. Paulo's breath hitched, turning into a cloud of white vapor in the frigid air. The little bird-like call had pulled him deeper into the Alaskan wilderness than he had intended. The dense spruce trees gave way to a wider expanse, leading to a frozen river. He crouched low behind a thicket of snow-laden bushes. The silence of the woods was soon broken by low, guttural growls. Then, they emerged, a pack of wolves. They were magnificent creatures, led by a truly massive Alaskan wolf. Paulo let out a slow, silent breath. Wolves, of course. Ben was right. The fear began to recede, replaced by a slight embarrassment at his own overactive imagination. But just as he started to relax, the alpha wolf's head snapped up. Its ears swiveled. Its nostrils flared. A chorus of growls and sharp barks erupted from the pack. They were no longer focused on the river. They were looking up. Then, it hit him. Not the cold, but a sudden, inexplicable gale of wind. It wasn't freezing. It was humid, almost stiflingly warm, carrying the faint, cloying scent of something musky and strangely metallic, like old blood and ozone. The wolf pack, these apex predators of the north, began to whimper. They scattered, each animal bolting in a different direction, all except the alpha. The colossal wolf stood its ground, hackles raised, a low, continuous growl rumbling deep in its throat. Its eyes, fixed on the sky above the river, shone with a furious, defiant courage. Paulo followed the wolf's gaze, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then he saw it. It descended from the bruised sky, a giant, bat-like figure. Its wings were immense, spanning what looked like 15 to 20 feet. Membranes stretched taut between bone. But it wasn't just a bat. This creature was humanoid. Its body was slender, almost gaunt, but powerfully built, dark and sinewy. This was no ordinary manananggal, splitting its body in half. This was something else. A different lineage, perhaps, evolved for a harsher, colder world. This Aswang had kept its lower half, but grown wings of impossible size. The creature plunged toward the ground with a sickening whoosh of air, targeting the defiant alpha wolf. The great wolf, with a roar, launched itself forward. The collision was brutal. The Aswang shrieked, a sound that was less bat-like and more like a woman screaming in agony and fury. The fight was brief, brutal, and utterly one-sided. The Aswang, with a final, piercing shriek of triumph, disengaged. The alpha wolf lay motionless on the snow, a dark, still shape against the white. Then, with an almost delicate precision, the winged humanoid bent over the fallen wolf. Paulo heard a wet, tearing sound, followed by a sickening slurping. It was feeding, a sudden, sharp crack of a twig under his own boot. The Aswang's head snapped up. Its eyes, two pinpricks of malevolent red in the gloom, locked onto Paulo's position. The hunt begins. A shiver of pure, undiluted terror, the kind that bypasses logic and goes straight for the ancient reptilian core of the brain, shot through me. I didn't breathe. The Aswang knew I was there. It was toying with me. The creature let out a low, sibilant hiss, a sound of anticipation. Then, it spoke. You have traveled so far, Doctor. The sound of my native language, uttered by that monstrosity in the Alaskan wilderness, was worse than any roar. It spoke Tagalog. It knew what I was. The creature took a single, deliberate step toward me. That snapped the paralysis. My vacation was over. I turned and ran, clumsy and frantic, scrambling through the deep snow. The Aswang didn't immediately pursue with its wings. Instead, I heard a sound that was somehow worse, the rhythmic crunch squeak of its heavy, deliberate footsteps in the snow. It was walking after me, stalking, playing with its food. I burst through the trees, the lights of my Kuya Ben's cabin a distant, hazy beacon of safety across the clearing.
Paulo!
The sound was Ben's voice, shrill with terror and relief. The front door of the cabin opened, and a shaft of warm, golden light spilled onto the porch. I pushed myself harder. Then, the footsteps stopped. The crunching of the snow ceased. The sudden silence was the most terrifying sound of all. I risked a glance over my shoulder as I scrambled onto the porch. The Aswang was no longer on the ground. It was in the air, a massive, silent shadow, suspended 50 feet above the tree line. It had stopped playing. Its huge, leathery wings began a slow, powerful beat, and it dove. Not straight for me, but for the cabin. It was going for the light. It was going for my brother.
Ben, pasok!
I screamed, lunging through the door. Get inside, now! I slammed the heavy wooden door shut and threw the thick deadbolt just as a colossal impact shook the entire structure. The sound was like a truck hitting a wall. Ben was standing in the middle of the living room, frozen, his eyes wide. The smell of adobo, garlic, and vinegar suddenly seemed obscene. Another hit, this one focused on the large front window, cracking the glass with a spiderweb of fracture lines. The air temperature in the cabin plummeted instantly. It's not a bear, Ben, I whispered, pulling my brother toward the center of the room. It's not a wolf. He finally snapped out of his trance.
I should have listened to Nane.
He choked out.
The salt. The rice. We should have put the garlic everywhere.
I didn't have time for the superstitions. I needed to fight. My gaze landed on the wall near the kitchen counter, a sledgehammer he used for demolition. Get behind the hearth, Ben. Stay low, I commanded, my voice strained but steady. I sprinted to the wall, grabbing the heavy sledgehammer. The creature hit the door again, its wings scrabbling against the wood. I could hear the sharp scraping of its talons against the doorframe.
Hindi ako takot sa'yo!
I muttered to the creature on the other side of the door, a challenge in my mother tongue. Come on. Superstitions and science. The heavy breathing on the other side of the door stopped. I gripped the sledgehammer, its cold steel handle a lifeline. The creature didn't break through the door. It broke through the roof. The sound was a horrific splintering, a sudden, explosive failure of the cabin's structure. A large section of the ceiling caved in, showering us with insulation and freezing air. The Aswang dropped with a terrifying thump onto the wooden floor 10 feet from me. It was even bigger up close. Its wings awkwardly folded around its gaunt, powerful frame. It completely ignored me. Its focus was entirely on Ben, crouched by the fireplace. Ben! I yelled, a primal warning. As the Aswang started its fast, terrifying sprint towards the hearth, I roared and swung the sledgehammer. I was too slow. The creature simply dropped its shoulder, and the head of the sledgehammer glanced off one of its massive, folded wings. The impact was like hitting concrete. My arms felt instantly numb. The creature paused. It turned its head and looked at me, a cold, curious malice crossing its gaunt features. It let out a short, clicking sound. The sound of an owl at a distance, now inches from my face. It lifted a taloned hand and slashed. I raised my left forearm defensively. A searing, shocking pain ripped through my arm. I stumbled back, dropping the useless sledgehammer with a deafening clang. The Aswang ignored the blood. It turned its back on me and lunged at the hearth, its claws extended.
No.
Ben screamed. In a flash of inherited Filipino defiance, he reacted. He grabbed the ceramic pot of adobo, boiling hot, that was sitting on the stovetop. He hurled the entire mass of chicken, vinegar, and garlic at the creature. A furious, wet shriek erupted from the Aswang. The boiling vinegar and garlic hit it square in the back, the steaming, acidic liquid scalding its dark skin. Smoke actually rose from its back. The creature reared back, a sound of agony mixed with rage tearing from its throat. The humid, metallic air in the room was momentarily replaced by the pungent, searing scent of cooked garlic and vinegar. The superstitions weren't just folklore. They were facts. The Aswang, disoriented and screeching, clawed at its back. This was my chance. I forced myself forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in my arm. My fingers brushed against the smooth, heavy marble mortar Ben used for crushing pepper. It was a dense, 3-pound cylinder of stone. I grabbed the mortar. The Aswang was thrashing, its wings beating wildly. It looked like it was preparing to take flight. I know what you hunt. I screamed at it in Tagalog. Ang puso ng bata. The heart of the child. I swung the marble mortar with all my remaining strength, aiming for the side of its head. It connected with a sickening wet crack right behind its ear. The Aswang went still. The terrible red light in its eyes blinked out. It collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut, its immense, dark wings folding around it one last time. It lay motionless on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of the ceiling and the comforting, sharp smell of my mother's adobo. Ben crawled out from behind the hearth, his face pale and streaked with soot.
Paolo,
He whispered, his voice thin and broken.
what are we going to do now?
I looked down at the monstrous form. I ripped off the sleeve of my outer layer and tied a makeshift tourniquet high on my injured forearm. We clean up the mess, Ben, I said, the words coming out steady, clinical. We hide the body. We don't call the police. We tell them the roof caved in from a heavy snow load. Then, we find out why this thing came so far north to hunt. And we find out if it has a bato. The Aswang was dead, but the horror was not over. The hunt had just begun.
The story ends, and the moon is high, leaving silence where the secrets lie. May your thoughts wander back to the shadows we explored tonight. Before you leave the fire's edge, please like this video and subscribe so the darkness can always find you when we return. Until the next tale, sleep soundly and keep a candle burning.